Did Kyle McCord have a terrible game last night? Yes, we all know that. 5 interceptions, but Syracuse football is making the correct move in sticking with him.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day, and we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And last night was not a good one for Syracuse football. They lost at number 19 Pitt, 41-13. We'll go over later on in the podcast what there is now to play for Syracuse football, because they're not going to make the college football playoff this season. They're not going to contend for the ACC. But trust me, there is still plenty to play for Syracuse football this year. We're going to go over the bye week struggles for this team. They are continuing a trend that is not so good for Syracuse. Hopefully they can correct that going forward with this brand new coaching staff. But we're going to begin this podcast talking about Kyle McCord and the comments that Fran Brown said in the post-game press conference, which is that they are sticking with their starting signal caller. Before we get to all that, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Obviously, last night wasn't very fun. Hope you guys had the chance to catch the post-game reaction show that I did. If not, after this, you can go ahead and find that on my YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts online, audio, wherever you watch, right? Not a fun one. They lost 41-13 at Pitt. Syracuse football is making the correct move in sticking with Kyle McCord, okay? Because after the game, here is what Fran Brown had to say. I'll quote it for you right now. Kyle is our quarterback. He's our leader. That's why we stuck with him, and that's why we'll continue to stick with him. There are 3 takeaways from this, but the biggest one is it's the right move sticking with Kyle McCord going forward. We all know that last night was a terrible performance from him. Terrible performance of Kyle McCord. I know he had 300 yards. That's cool and all, but he had 5 interceptions and he threw 3 touchdowns, but they all went to the other team. It was bad. It was brutal. It was probably the worst game in Kyle McCord's football life. Think about that for a second. His football life. Kyle McCord has been dominating football ever since he was probably a little kid. He was a 5-star recruit out of high school. And by the way, when he was in high school, he was throwing to Marvin Harrison. Not to say that Marvin Harrison made Kyle McCord, but I imagine that Kyle McCord did not have many off days in high school. He was never this bad at Ohio State. Like, I know people are taking the victory lap and, that's the Kyle McCord we all know. He never had 5 interceptions at Ohio State. His worst statistical game was against Notre Dame, and it doesn't come close to what he did last night against Pitt. It was his worst game. The easy impulse is to say that, man, I think Syracuse should try something different, try something new. But in my opinion, as bad as last game was, as bad as last night was for Kyle McCord, they're making the correct move in sticking with him going forward. One awful performance does not take away what Kyle did in the first half of the season. First half of the season, first 6 games, he was one of the most prolific passers in the country. He was second in yards per game. He was up there with touchdowns. He only had 6 interceptions, right? And I know he had 1 per game on average. Still, that's because they're throwing the ball more than any other team in the country. His interception rate wasn't that high. It was like 2.5% prior to tonight, okay? So you got to stick with him. You got to have faith that he can overcome what happened last night. He's a veteran. He just had a terrible performance. But I agree with Coach Fran Brown that he is Syracuse's leader, and you got to stick with him going forward. Now, is the leash maybe a little bit tighter? Maybe. You can make that argument, right? That if he lays another clunker against Virginia Tech next week, maybe we start talking about trying something else. But even then, you would think that might be an overreaction. So I'm glad that this Syracuse coaching staff, more specifically Fran Brown, is sticking with Kyle McCord. It is the correct move to make, despite how awful his performance was last night. And also, look, I place the majority of blame on Kyle McCord. I do. He had a terrible game. I can't understate it enough. I can't say it enough that he had a terrible game. But I am not going to exonerate the offensive line. The offensive line was brutal against Pitt. Everyone on that offensive line, they just didn't give him a lot of time to throw. And you don't really need to give him a lot of time to throw when it's short passing routes, but still. They didn't give him a lot of time. This offensive line deserves blame too. The most of it goes to Kyle McCord because you still don't have to throw the ball to the other team. But it wasn't necessarily all on him. Overall, I think it was the right move, sticking with Kyle McCord going forward, defending him in his post-game press conference, Fran Brown. Also, in those comments that he said, once again, he said, Kyle is our quarterback. He's our leader. That's why we stuck with him, and that's why we'll continue to stick with him. This quote cleared up any possibility that Kyle was going to be taken out at a halftime. I did see some things circulating on Twitter at the half, like, do they switch quarterbacks at the half, right? What were they down? 31-0 or something like that. Kyle McCord had 3 pick sixes in one half, 4 interceptions overall in the half, 5 for the game. I get why you would want to, but I also agree with the Syracuse coaching staff in letting him play in the second half. You have to let him play. First of all, even though you're down 31-0, fluky stuff can happen in college football, right? If Syracuse scored 14 points in the third quarter and all of a sudden they're down 31-14 heading into the fourth, it's somewhat a game. So you kind of have to stick with your starter at that point, even though he's playing really bad. Second of all, there is that confidence factor with him. You can't diminish, again, what he has done the first 6 games. So one terrible half, you can't all of a sudden pull the plug. So I understand why I saw some stuff circulating about, hey, do we go to Michael Johnson or Carlos Del Rio Wilson, or do we play a young kid like Jakari Williams in the second half? But overall, this coaching staff made the correct move in having Kyle McCord play the majority, or not play the majority of the second half, but play into the second half. And he rewarded Syracuse. I mean, the first drive of the second half, they converted, I think, 3 fourth downs on it. 2 of them were QB sneaks. And they scored a touchdown. They scored a touchdown on that drive, which was, I guess, quote unquote, win for us, right? That they scored a touchdown in the second half. Not the beginning of the third quarter, but the drive took 9 minutes. But the first series of the third quarter led to a touchdown. So hopefully Kyle McCord can build off of that, right? You got to play Kyle McCord into the second half of that game. However, I apologize that I'm going to repeat myself on this from last night. There is a line with that. That's my third takeaway from this quote. I understand with wanting to stick with Kyle McCord going forward. That's the correct move. I understand playing him into the second half, even though the game was a blowout. You kind of have to. It's the correct move to make. But he cannot be in the game down 41-13 with 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter. He can't be in the game there, especially because he's the signal caller going forward, right? He's going to start next week at Virginia Tech. It's going to happen. Now, I said this last night. I understand that you want him to maybe put a drive together to build onto the next game, right? I understand that, and I think Syracuse on that drive, they ended up missing a 48-yard field goal. Special teams again, but you can't have him at that point in the game out there. You just can't. I'm not going to blame Kyle McCord at all because he's a competitor. He should want to be on the field. This is on the coaching staff. You cannot have Kyle McCord out there with 5 minutes left in the game when you're down or even up 28 points. The reasoning is simple. Injuries happen. And I understand that you cannot take away injuries from football. They will happen. They will happen. Like Oronde Gadsden got hurt in this one. Hopefully he's okay. Yasin Willis got hurt in the fourth quarter. That happens, right? It sucks. It's unfortunate, but injuries do happen. Imagine if Kyle McCord got hurt. Imagine if he got hurt. How would you feel about that? If he got hurt down 28 points in the fourth quarter with 5 minutes left, the game is over. You can't take away injuries, but you can mitigate the injuries or mitigate the risk of an injury. That's what I should say. You can't take away them. They're going to happen, but you can mitigate the risk. You can't have your starting quarterback on the field up or down 28 points with 5 minutes left in the game. It cannot happen. Going forward, just don't let that happen again. I get it. You want the confidence factor in your quarterback, but you already showed faith in your quarterback by having him play in the second half. You already showed faith in that. You're showing him faith in the post-game press conference when you say he's our quarterback going forward. There's no quarterback controversy. There was no reason for him to be in the game with 5 minutes left, up or down 28 points. In this case, down 28 points. Overall, Kyle McCord played a terrible game. It was his worst game maybe of his football life. But I do think that Syracuse football is making the correct move in sticking with him going forward. Let's hope that he can have a bounce back performance returning home against Virginia Tech. I imagine he can't be much worse, if that makes you feel any better. He can't be much worse than what he was on Thursday night, all right? So hopefully Kyle McCord can bounce back. Now coming up, we're going to talk about the bye week struggles for Syracuse football. Every time I have pre-alcohol drinks before bed, I notice a difference the next day. Even after a night out, I can confidently plan on doing whatever I want, really, going for a walk in the park, whatever it is, watching TV, having a relaxing day. Maybe if it's a Saturday, watching Syracuse football hopefully win, right? I can do that all without worrying, right? For the best results, make pre-alcohol your first drink of the night. Pace yourself and get a good night's sleep, and then you'll wake up feeling refreshed and ready to take on the day. Go to ZBiotics.com/LockedOnCollege to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use Locked On College at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to ZBiotics.com/LockedOnCollege and use the code LockedOnCollege at checkout for 15% off. You can win now up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. And Prize Picks is the only real money daily fantasy platform with an injury insurance policy, so your lineups stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. That's right. If your player leaves in the first half and does not return, think about Oronde Gadsden, right? He got hurt in the first half and did not return yesterday. Prize Picks will keep your lineup live. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks is the best way to win real money this football season. Which players are going off? Which ones aren't? Make your picks in less than 60 seconds and turn your sports opinions into real money all season long on Prize Picks. And when looking at the football board yesterday, specifically college football, Syracuse, Kyle McCord, he had more or less than 326.5 passing yards. He came just shy of that with, I think, 321, right? Because he's playing into the fourth quarter for whatever reason, down 28 points, but that's neither here nor there. But he still could not have more than 326.5. That's all right, though. It was just a bad performance from Kyle McCord. Anyways, let's talk about Prize Picks, right? Download the app today and use code LockedOnCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Download the app today and use code LockedOnCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. Unfortunately, the bye week struggles continue for Syracuse football. They are now 0-2 this season in games after a bye week. Not very good, obviously. 0-2. Their first one was against Stanford, and then obviously last night against Pitt on the road. Not good. Not good. But before we get to the point, which is that the bye week struggles are continuing for Syracuse football, I want to make one thing crystal clear, okay? I want to make this very clear. A bye week is not an excuse. It's not an excuse. I do not want to hear it. It's not an excuse that this team continues to struggle after a bye week, right? Both of Syracuse's losses, as I just said, have come after the bye week. But here's really why there's no excuse for it, right? Stanford was also coming off a bye. And they had to travel too, all the way from California. Remember how big of a deal everyone made when they were led into the ACC? What's going to happen when everyone has to travel, right? They had to travel from the West Coast to the East Coast after a bye week. And they won. Pitt was also coming off a bye. Now, I get it that Syracuse was on the road. I get it that they don't like to win in Pitt. They haven't won there since 2001. It's still not an excuse because Pitt is also coming off a bye. Pitt and Stanford were coming off bye weeks as well. It's not an excuse that Syracuse football once again laid an egg after a bye week. Prior to Fran Brown, and this is why it's called bye week struggles continue, because prior to Fran Brown, Syracuse football's head coach was Dino Babers from 2016 to the very end of 2023. And after bye weeks under Dino Babers, their record was not great. They were 4-9. All right. And I'm going to put a Fran Brown quote here up on the screen for you guys right now. Here's what he said post-game. Okay. I thought that we practiced really well both times off of a bye week. The ball didn't fall the way it was supposed to. We'll look through all this stuff and make the changes we need as a program. So 2 things with this. Maybe I'm taking this a little too literally. The ball didn't bounce the way it was supposed to. The ball didn't bounce the way it was supposed to. Maybe I'm just taking it too literally, but that's not what happened last night. That's not what happened at all. Kyle McCord's interceptions were not fluky ones. I know the second one was off a batted ball, and the linebacker who caught it made a terrific play to keep that above the ground and make an interception. But it was a poor decision that led to the interception. It's one of those things where sometimes you create your own good luck and sometimes you create your own bad luck. And a bad decision can lead to an unfortunate result, even though you can maybe consider that a little bit unlucky that it should have been an incomplete pass off a batted ball. But you create your own bad luck when you throw a bad ball. That's just how it works. Both times after the bye week, Syracuse football's offense has looked flat to start the game. It's looked flat. It's not a symptom of, the ball's just not bouncing our way. That's not what happened. Against Stanford, they were down 10-0 after the first quarter, getting drastically outgained. Couldn't do anything on offense for the most part in that first half, aside from one big play to Amari Hatcher at the end of the first half. And Stanford's not even a good team. We've seen what they have done since that game. That loss just still looks terrible, right? They play against a good team in Pitt last night. You get embarrassed when your offense is flat after a bye week. So this is not a case of the ball just didn't bounce our way. No, the offense just was not prepared, and their quarterback had an off game. Their offensive line was not good. Their receivers were dropping balls. Nothing was going right, but it was not a symptom of the ball is not bouncing our way. I do want to at least give a little shout out to the defense because I thought they actually played pretty well. They actually played pretty well. It wasn't a bad game from the defense. At least they showed up, right? But overall, this was not a case, as Fran Brown said, that it didn't fall the way it was supposed to. The ball just bounced the wrong way. No. They just got completely outplayed on offense. They made that Pitt defense look a lot better than it really is. It's not bad. It's not a bad unit, but going into the game, it was kind of middle of the pack in the ACC. It wasn't some elite defense. They made them look like the Steel Curtain. That's what happened, right? My second takeaway from this is that as much as I'm criticizing Coach Fran Brown here and the rest of the coaching staff, there's going to be growing pains. And it goes back to having a brand new head coach, a coach in Fran Brown who's never been a head coach at any level prior to this season. There's going to be growing pains. And I hope that this bye week trend of struggling after a bye does not continue. And I think you have to have a little bit of faith that next season, when they're coming off a bye week, that they're not going to completely lay an egg, right? You got to hope, you got to have a little bit of faith that they can correct those issues and make the necessary changes that are required to come out more better prepared after a bye week. There's just going to be growing pains with this. The thing that separates Fran Brown and Dino Babers right now, aside from the recruiting aspect, we know that recruiting Fran Brown is like miles ahead of where Dino Babers was. But what separates Fran Brown is that Dino Babers had 8 years. He had 8 seasons to figure it out, what to do after a bye week. And he was 4-9. It was time for him to go. Great person. It was time for him to go. Fran Brown has 1 year. It's not even a full year yet. Not even a full year. There's going to be growing pains. So yes, early results after a bye week look very discouraging. They do. But I do have some faith that going forward, they're going to have this team better prepared after a bye week for next season and 2026 and maybe 2027 as well. And beyond that, we'll see. But you get the idea. Let's have a little bit of faith that Fran Brown can correct the issues going forward with this team post bye week. It's not going to happen this season. They got no more bye weeks. But next year, let's see what happens. It's certainly going to be a talking point, though, when we're on this podcast, when I'm talking on the podcast next season, when we're talking about bye weeks. It's going to be a talking point, but let's hope that they can correct those issues. All right. Again, another bad performance. It doesn't diminish what Fran Brown did in the first half of the season and what he's done overall this season. Syracuse is 5-2, 2-2 in the conference. I think he's still having a very good first year season, and they could still have a very good season this year. They can still have a very good regular season, make a bowl game and all that, boost recruiting. Just going forward, let's see what this team can do after a bye week in 2025, 2026, 2027. That's going to be the real test for Fran Brown and whoever is on his staff for next year. Can this team come better prepared after the bye week next year? All right, so the bye week struggles for Syracuse football, unfortunately, they continue for another year. It wasn't good with Dino Babers, 4-9 from 2016 to 2023. 2024, they're 0-2 after a bye week. Hopefully that changes next season. All right, so we've gone over so far on this podcast how the Syracuse coaching staff is making the correct move, backing Kyle McCord and sticking with him going forward. We talked about the bye week struggles. We don't need to keep rehashing it. Now, what is there to play for Syracuse football? I'll answer that for you next. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. And you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Syracuse football last night closed as a 5.5-point underdog on FanDuel. Obviously, they lost a lot more by 5.5. I would have liked if it was at least a close game. They did not cover 5.5 points. They lost 41-13. It was ugly. That's the nice way to put it. But hopefully next week they can bounce back against Virginia Tech. In fact, I would look for a bounce back performance from Syracuse football. I think at least early on, we haven't even seen Virginia Tech play. I guess, do they play tomorrow? I think they do. But regardless, look for a bounce back performance from Syracuse football. You can check the odds out when they are released on FanDuel. That's FanDuel.com. Syracuse football this season still has plenty to play for. Now, I know last night sucked. It sucked for everyone. Nobody enjoyed it, right? Fran Brown apologized to Syracuse University and everyone involved with that. I appreciate the apology and all that. I get it. It sucked. And it especially sucks because they're 2-2 in the conference, which effectively knocks them out of making the ACC title game. They can't do it at 6-2. It's not going to happen the way it's working out right now in the conference. Even if they run the table and go 10-2, I don't think this team makes the college football playoff on that resume. So what is there to play for going forward, right? There's still a lot. Let me just tell you, okay? Before the season, we knew that contending for the ACC was not a pipe dream, but we knew it was a long shot. And we knew that making the college football playoff would also be a long shot. But here's the deal. This team can still have a strong second half of the year, and it's on the rest of this team to not give up in the second half of the season. Kyle McCord in his post-game press conference said that he's well aware of what Syracuse football the last few years has been like in the second half of the season, where they always start strong. 4-0 last season, 6-0 the year before that. What were they? 5-4 one year. The year before that, the last time they didn't make a bowl game, they were 5-4, then lost 3 straight. They tend to collapse in the second half of the season for whatever reason. One way or another, they just tend to collapse. But there's still plenty to play for here, all right? Still plenty to play for. Number one, they're playing for the future. These guys are playing for the future, players and coaches, whether they are back next season, whether they decide to transfer, whether they're going to the NFL. They're all here to play, to put stuff on tape, to put quality play, quality coaching on tape. There is no reason to give up on this season because a lot of them are playing for their futures or coaching for their futures. That's just how it works. Let's say you're a potential NFL guy in Kyle McCord, right? He just had a terrible performance. It would not be wise for him to give up, and I don't think he's going to give up. I'm not accusing him of quitting on this season or anything like that. What I'm trying to tell you guys is I'm demonstrating a point that you still got to play. You can't give up. You got to show fight. I know the ACC title can't happen anymore. I know you're probably not making the college football playoff anymore. You still got to play. You still got to put good film on tape. You still got to put good coaching on tape. All right? You're playing and coaching for the future. Second of which, you're playing for recruiting too. You're coaching for recruiting too. Would you consider 8-4 a successful season? Forget what Fran Brown has maintained in his press conferences. He always tends to say the right things in his press conferences, right? Like 8-4 is not a success to him. I understand that. It probably isn't. I understand, right? Because he'll always say going undefeated and winning a national championship, that is his definition of success. Now, to me, that's the ultimate definition of success. That's the ultimate definition. But again, I'm not playing and I'm not coaching on the team. So my mindset's a little bit different than winning a national championship or going undefeated. I consider 8-4 to be a quality regular season, or 9-3, or even 10-2. If Syracuse decides it wants to run the table, sure, I'll take it too. Right? How do you think that impacts recruiting? How do you think it impacts recruiting? A quality regular season. You go 8-4, 9-3. You show that even when you get knocked down, you still find a way to bounce back. You make a quality bowl game. You send guys to the NFL. That helps recruiting. Go ask Florida State, which is the flip side to having a terrible season, and what it can do to recruiting. Seems like every single day another Florida State recruit is decommitting. Javion Hilson, that 5-star who I think visited Syracuse or is going to visit Syracuse, right? That defensive end, one of the best ones in the country. He was a Florida State commit. He decommitted. It matters. You're playing and coaching for recruiting as well. Maybe that doesn't matter for the players that are... Actually, it should matter for the players too, because you're going to be an alum at this school one way or another. Coaches, it obviously definitely matters because you're going to want good players to play for you going forward. You need to show that even when you get knocked down, you can bounce back and still have a quality season. They're never going to admit that 8-4 is good or 9-3 is good. They're never going to actually admit that. But I think deep down, us as fans, us as hosts or podcasts, whatever it is, we'll take that, especially for a first-year head coach and a brand new coaching staff. We'll certainly take that, and it'll help recruiting. It'll help recruiting. So what is Syracuse playing for? Well, they're playing for the future. and they're playing for recruiting. That's a lot. And to have a productive regular season, make a quality bowl game. Sucks that they're not going to be in ACC title contention. It sucks that even if they run the table, I'm not sure that would even be enough to make the college football playoff. But you know what? You still got to play. You still got to show effort. You still got to fight. That's the reality of it. And I have faith that this team can still pull together, learn from this experience. It's a brutal loss. Put it all together next Saturday against Virginia Tech. How about that? All right. So that about does it for all three segments here. Sticking with McCord is the right move. The bye week struggles, unfortunately, continuing, and what there is to play for Syracuse football. Now, what's coming up on the rest of the podcast? Well, I got good news for you. Syracuse basketball season is back. Kinda. It's kinda back, all right? Because tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern, the Orange have an exhibition game against Clarion. So their first live action since the ACC tournament against NC State last year. Right? So they're kind of back. It's an exhibition game. I think what I want to do for that is I do want to do a post game for it, but I don't know if I'm going to do a full podcast on it because it's an exhibition game. Maybe do a 10 to 15 minute episode on it. I think that is my plan going forward with those. And the reason why I say those is because they have another exhibition game on October 30th. That is a Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Eastern. They are playing Slippery Rock University. So they got two exhibition games, and then their season opener, I believe, is Monday, November 4th against Lemoyne. That should be a fun one. So Syracuse basketball is back, kinda. Next Monday, they are back officially for the first game of the regular season, all right? Thank you for making Locked On Syracuse your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the Locked On ACC podcast. I'm sure that Alex Dono was wrong about picking Syracuse in this one, and I know that Kenton Gibbs is already taking his victory lap on Kyle McCord. It took you 7 games, but you were right, finally. It only took you 7 weeks. It took over almost 2 months, but fine. You were right for one game, right? They're going to keep it real. They bring you the truth about where your favorite ACC team stands within the conference. You can find Locked On ACC on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Folks, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for listening. If you like this video, click that like button. And if you really liked it, subscribe to the channel. Turn on those notifications so you know right away when I am dropping the next podcast. Everyone, take care.